Everything changes in a matter of seconds in the National Football League. One single play, one bad break, one media narrative can completely alter the destiny of an entire franchise. But what happens when a multi-billion-dollar league seemingly decides to just turn a blind eye to pure, unadulterated reality? Welcome to NFL Nexus. We are your premier destination for the deep, untold stories unfolding on the gridiron. Before we unravel today's mystery, make sure you subscribe to the channel, like this explainer, and comment below on what you think about the league's perception of this team. And if you truly want to go beyond the surface and support the deep dives we do here, please consider becoming a channel member. Okay, today we are dissecting a profound, almost intentional discrepancy. We're looking at a team that physically fought its way to an 11-win season, a team that seized the NFC North crown by absolute force, a team that took a toxic losing culture and violently flipped it on its head. We are, of course, talking about the 2026 Chicago Bears. Yet, if you look at the national media landscape right now, if you read the evaluations from so-called anonymous executives, scouts, and top-tier analysts, you would honestly think this team barely scraped together a winning record. There's a stark, baffling contrast between the Chicago Bears' actual, verifiable on-field success and the deafening lack of respect they are receiving heading into this new season. It's a narrative of defiance, and it starts right here.
So let's dive into this because the underlying psychology of how a championship-caliber team gets intentionally sidelined by the media, it is absolutely fascinating. I mean, ask yourself, why is an 11-win reigning division champion team being treated like an absolute afterthought? In the hyper-competitive 365-day ecosystem of the NFL, respect is supposed to be the ultimate currency, right? You win, you get paid. You get paid in accolades. You get paid in primetime television slots. And you get paid in towering preseason rankings. But heading into the 2026 season, the Chicago Bears find themselves squarely shoved right back into the underdog role. And it's a role that feels entirely manufactured by external forces. The national media has essentially decided that last year's 11 wins were just a fluke, an anomaly, a glitch in the matrix, rather than the concrete foundation of a new powerhouse. And you really have to understand the psychological toll this takes on a locker room. This creates an incredible, palpable tension inside the building. Because this isn't just about a few overlooked players, you know? This is an institutional dismissal of a 53-man roster that has already proven, on the field, that it knows exactly how to close out violent games in the fourth quarter. The friction between what the Bears know they are behind closed doors and what the league insists they are to the public is setting the stage for one of the most explosive collision courses we've seen in recent NFL history.
Now, to understand the media's hesitation, we do have to look objectively at the baseline reality of the roster turnover in Chicago. The critics aren't pulling their skepticism entirely out of thin air. There are genuine, structural, tectonic shifts happening right now at Hallis Hall. The Bears have had to bid farewell to some extremely significant foundational pieces. On the offensive side of the ball, they're navigating the massive departure of a premier weapon in DJ Moore. We're talking about a player who demanded double coverage and absolutely dictated defensive coverages. They're also dealing with the exit of their anchor at center, Drew Dahlman. Over on defense, the losses are equally heavy. That's headlined by the departure of linebacker Tremaine Edmonds, a guy who essentially served as the central nervous system of that unit, along with numerous key members of the secondary. But if you truly analyze the microarchitecture of this team, the secondary isn't the existential threat the media desperately wants it to be. No, the glaring red flag, the true vulnerability that general manager Ryan Poles has arguably not been bold enough to fix in his quest for a Super Bowl, is the defensive line. The starters are returning to the front seven, but they are doing so completely devoid of the elite, game-wrecking reinforcements required for a top-tier pass rush. This weakness in the trenches, this is the exact crack in the armor that the national media is using to justify their sweeping, overarching dismissals of this entire team.
But you really need to look closer at the sheer, glaring hypocrisy of these national rankings. When ESPN released their 2026 NFL roster rankings, meticulously evaluating all 32 teams' starting lineups, they placed the Chicago Bears at number 17. 17! Middle of the pack, mediocre, an afterthought. They argued the offensive line's the best part of the team while pointing to that defensive line as the fatal, insurmountable flaw. But look at the context. Look at the rest of the division. ESPN ranked the Detroit Lions all the way up at number 6 and the Green Bay Packers sitting comfortably at number 10. This is where the logic entirely unravels and the bias becomes absolutely blinding. Both the Lions and the Packers experienced major, disruptive turnover on their offensive lines this offseason. And let's look specifically at Green Bay for a second. The Packers didn't just lose minor rotational pieces, they bled massive, massive contributors. They lost brilliant young receivers in Dontevion Wicks and Romeo Doubs. And, crucially, they lost their star pass rusher, the sheer engine of their defense, Rashawn Gary. So, tell me, How does a team that loses its primary offensive weapons and its defensive cornerstone remain protected in the top 10 while the reigning division champions are relegated to the bottom half of the league? The double standard being applied to Chicago right now is thick and it is palpable.
The reality, though, when stripped of media bias and empty narratives, it paints a much more menacing picture of what the Chicago Bears are actually bringing to the field on Sundays. This roster should be ranked significantly higher, and the reasons are staring the league right in the face. First and foremost, you have Caleb Williams entering his third year in the National Football League. This is huge. The game is slowing down for him. His processing speed is increasing exponentially. And when a quarterback with his raw physical traits starts seeing the defense in slow motion, it becomes lethal. Plus, he's entering his second season under the strategic, brilliant command of head coach Ben Johnson. And surrounding Williams is an absolute arsenal of young, explosive talent. We are looking at a hyper-athletic group of skilled players poised for massive breakout campaigns. Luther Burton III, Colston Loveland, Rome Odunze. These aren't just depth pieces to be rotated in, okay? These are dynamic, matchup nightmares that will force defensive coordinators to literally lose sleep. And on the other side of the ball, that supposedly depleted secondary the media won't stop talking about, it is getting a massive, immediate injection of life with the healthy return of Kyler Gordon and Jalen Johnson for Week 1. Make no mistake, this is a young, starving, and heavily armed roster that is being deeply, dangerously underestimated.
And the disrespect isn't just limited to the overarching macro evaluations of the team. No, it trickles all the way down into the micro evaluations of the individual players who actually moved the chains for this 11-win juggernaut. Which brings us to a glaring, almost offensive individual omission, DeAndre Swift. Every single offseason, ESPN polls anonymous NFL executives, coaches, and scouts to compile a definitive inside-the-league list of the top 10 players at each position. It's basically the shadow economy of NFL opinions. Well, when the 2026 running back rankings dropped, DeAndre Swift was nowhere to be found. He didn't make the top 10, he didn't even make the list of 3 honorable mentions. Zero recognition. Despite an incredible, highly productive reunion with Ben Johnson, the exact man who utilized him so effectively during their time in Detroit, Swift's standing among the league's elite shot callers has remained stubbornly, impossibly stagnant. He received a scattering of meaningless votes, mirroring his exact position from the previous year. It essentially proves that in the eyes of these anonymous evaluators, he is viewed as exactly the same player, despite having a vastly superior team-carrying season.
And the crucial point here boils down to a single, undeniable number: 1,087. 1,087. That is not a computer projection, folks. That is the actual career-high rushing yardage DeAndre Swift violently punished defenses for during the 2025 season. In a league that supposedly values raw production over absolutely everything else, the blind spot regarding Swift is truly astonishing. Operating as the lead back in Ben Johnson's high-powered offensive system and running behind a formidable physical offensive front, Swift put the team on his back in the most brutal areas of the field. He didn't just compile empty stats in garbage time, he found the end zone 9 separate times on the ground. He averaged a bruising, highly efficient 4.9 yards per carry. And perhaps most importantly, he proved he could handle a grueling, body-breaking workload. He commanded over 250 touches in this offense while maintaining his status as a legitimate home run threat on any given down. The sheer physical toll of 250 touches in the NFL trenches is monumental. It breaks men. Yet producing a career-best campaign under those exact conditions was somehow not enough to move the needle for these anonymous evaluators.
Now, this complete lack of external validation creates a terrifying internal pressure cooker for DeAndre Swift as he approaches the 2026 campaign. Because even his own head coach, the very architect of his recent success, is publicly demanding a higher ceiling. Listen closely to what Ben Johnson said during OTAs when evaluating Swift's standout year. He said, and I quote, "He's a dynamic player. I've known that about him since he came into the league firsthand up there in Detroit, and certainly last year. I wasn't surprised with the year that he had. Is he capable of more? Absolutely. He absolutely is. And he's a vital part of what we do here." Those specific words, "is he capable of more? Absolutely," are incredibly heavy, because Swift is entering the final year of his 3-year, $24 million contract. He provided incredible value compared to the bloated mega deals handed out to players like Saquon Barkley, sure, but the Bears management knew they weren't paying for an otherworldly guaranteed superstar. Now the burden is entirely squarely on Swift's shoulders to prove he is more than just a good enough cog in Johnson's meticulously designed offensive machine.
And Swift himself, he is acutely aware of the razor-thin margin for error he currently faces. He isn't hiding from the expectations, he is staring down the exact reality of his situation. "I can do more," Swift told reporters recently. "I wish I would have been able to contribute a little more in the passing game. We've got so many pass catchers on the field, so whenever it does come up, I try to make something happen with it, but I do know I could do more." This is a man looking at a rapidly ticking clock. Time is running out. This isn't just about his future in Chicago, it's about his financial future in the NFL. Period. If he hits the open market next spring carrying the dreaded career-killing label of merely a system back or just being good enough, his financial value plummet. And the shadow looming behind him in Chicago is immense. If Ben Johnson isn't completely satisfied with Swift's evolution in 2026, well, Johnson has a documented history of ruthlessly cutting ties to upgrade, just like he did in Detroit when he swiftly moved from Swift to Jahmyr Gibbs. The whispers are already starting in the back channels. Could the Bears make a run at Jonathan Taylor in free agency? Could they target a premier explosive back in the 2027 draft? The tension surrounding Swift right now is absolute. But listen. As glaring and infuriating as the disrespect toward the roster and individual players like DeAndre Swift is, it fundamentally pales in comparison to the most egregious insult of the entire 2026 offseason. For this, we have to shift our focus to the very top of the organization, to the mastermind, the architect of the Chicago Bears resurrection. When you orchestrate a massive cultural flip of this magnitude, when you take a team completely accustomed to residing in the dark, depressing basement of the NFC North and you drag them, kicking and screaming, into the playoffs as division champions, you expect a certain level of reverence. You expect your name to be mentioned in hushed tones among the elite tactical minds in the sport. But Pro Football Focus had a completely different perspective when they released their 2026 head coach rankings. And what they published wasn't just an innocent oversight, it was a head-scratching, deeply flawed decision that provides unlimited bulletin board material for Hallis Hall.
This builds into an absolutely infuriating narrative for Chicago fans when you actually look at Pro Football Focus's top 10 head coaches entering 2026. Matt LaFleur of the Green Bay Packers is ranked number 6 in the entire National Football League. And Ben Johnson, unranked, left off the list completely. This decision openly defies every single metric of recent success. Let's really look at the context here. Matt LaFleur inherited a championship-caliber team that was already built, complete with a Hall of Fame championship-winning quarterback in Aaron Rodgers. Yes, he had 3 early 13-win seasons with a living legend under center, but since then, the Packers have managed exactly 1 double-digit win season in 4 grueling years. LaFleur has actively regressed with the very young quarterback he demanded the franchise groom as his long-term starter. Just months ago, there were legitimate, loud conversations in the media about whether LaFleur belonged on the hot seat, yet he is inexplicably gifted a top 6 ranking. Meanwhile, Ben Johnson took over a fractured team with a rookie quarterback in Caleb Williams. He inherited a roster completely unaccustomed to winning high-stakes primetime games. And in 1 single year, he installed a brand new culture, won 11 games, and claimed the division crown. And yet, he is entirely ignored by the supposed experts. It's wild.
In this exclusion by the media, it is only going to pour high-octane gasoline on a fire that Ben Johnson ignited the very second he arrived in the Windy City. During his very first press conference, standing at the podium under the bright lights, Johnson didn't offer the standard empty platitudes about respecting divisional opponents. He didn't play the political game. He took a direct, calculated jab. "Who likes the Packers?" Johnson asked the media, a wry, knowing smile cutting right through the tension in the room. He openly reminisced about how much he genuinely enjoyed beating Matt LaFleur twice a year when he was the offensive coordinator for the Detroit Lions. He made his stance crystal clear from day one, establishing an immediate, visceral rivalry that sent shockwaves through the entire division. And you want to know the most vital part of that entire exchange? He backed up the talk. He didn't just run his mouth for the cameras. He went out, out-schemed, and out-coached LaFleur, physically beating the Packers in 2 of their 3 highly contested matchups last season. The history is written in permanent ink in the win-loss column, but the media rankings suggest a completely alternate reality.
And this brilliantly illustrates why Ben Johnson's fundamentally a different caliber of coach. He's one who builds a foundation from the absolute ground up, rather than relying solely on the sheer talent of inherited superstars. You see, the true magic of the Bears' 11-win season wasn't just about Caleb Williams throwing 50-yard deep balls. It was about the culture of absolute, unwavering belief that Johnson instilled in the bottom 50% of the roster. Look at the smallest details. Look at the unsung heroes who stepped into the terrifying abyss when the lights were at their absolute brightest. Think of Josh Blackwell, a rotational player, coming off the edge as an absolute blur to block a critical, game-altering field goal. Think of Jake Moody, staring down the uprights through swirling, nightmarish Chicago winds, delivering clutch kicks in miserable weather on short notice when the season hung in the balance. Think of Ja'Day Walker, a player with incredibly limited NFL experience, running a flawless route and executing perfectly to catch a game-tying touchdown when it mattered more than anything. Think of Jordan McFadden, being tapped on the shoulder and called upon to make his very first start of the season in the unforgiving, violent crucible of the NFL playoffs. This is exactly how you measure a coach. Not by what his highly paid superstars do on a sunny Sunday afternoon, but by how his unheralded depth pieces respond to catastrophic adversity. Johnson empowered the forgotten men on the roster to become absolute legends in these micro moments.
And if you want the ultimate undeniable proof of the massive gap in coaching resilience between these two men, you simply have to look at how they navigated catastrophic season-altering injuries. The true test of any NFL system is what happens when the primary load-bearing pillars are violently kicked out from underneath it. According to the reports, the Packers feature the best defensive player in the division, in edge rusher Micah Parsons. When LaFleur lost Parsons to injury last season, the Green Bay system completely collapsed. The Packers went into a devastating, uncontrollable tailspin. One coach let a single injury derail a franchise, losing 6 consecutive games to end their season in absolute disgrace. They had no answers, no adjustments, just a freefall. Now, contrast that stark reality with Ben Johnson in Chicago. Johnson was forced to navigate essentially half the season without his 2 best defensive players, cornerbacks Jalen Johnson and Kyler Gordon. The secondary was absolutely decimated. But instead of folding, instead of standing at the podium making excuses about a lack of personnel, Johnson adapted his scheme. The Bears kept winning. One coach crumbled without his star, the other lost 2 stars and still marched his team to a division title.
Which brings us right to the precipice of the 2026 NFL season, and the ultimate question hanging like a storm cloud over Soldier Field. Will this literal mountain of national media disrespect become the ultimate, undeniable fuel for the Chicago Bears? Think about it. They've been told repeatedly that their roster is mediocre. Their lead running back has been told that his career year means absolutely nothing to the people who matter. Their brilliant head coach has been told his cultural revolution is vastly inferior to a coach who completely collapsed down the stretch. The Chicago Bears are walking into this season carrying a chip on their shoulder the size of the Sears Tower. They aren't just playing for a Lombardi trophy anymore, they are playing for pure vindication. They are playing to force the anonymous scouts, the smug executives, and the television pundits to look them in the eye and admit they were wrong. It is going to be a thrilling, violent, and fascinating campaign to witness, and we'll be here for every single snap of it. Thank you for diving deep into the trenches with us today on this explainer. If you want to stay ahead of the narrative and understand the real forces shaping the league, make sure you hit that subscribe button for NFL Nexus, like this explainer, and drop a comment with your predictions for the Bears this year. And again, to support the deep, unvarnished dives we do here, consider becoming a channel member. Until next time, keep your eyes on the field because the truth always reveals itself between the hashes.